For landlords, by landlords. The Rent Perfect Podcast with David Pickron.
Hey, David Pickron here along with Denny Dobbins. Let's talk lease clauses today that for some people, like me, they don't make a lot of sense. But we have them in our lease and we need to understand them. So today, let's make sense of something that I have questions on. I have Denny Dobbins here, our attorney with us. And you know, we should understand every paragraph of our lease and what it is doing. So when we get asked about it or we make a move, we know that we are in the confines of our lease. Denny, I'm going to pop you with a part of the lease I have a question on. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Part of my lease, which you have written for me. Thank you very much, attorney. By the way, he's my attorney. And any changes you make, please check with your state law and check with your own attorney. So I had to put in that little tidbit there. Okay, so in my lease it says, resident shall comply with all rules and regulations now or hereafter promulgated by a landlord. The rules and regulations contained herein may be amended at any time during the term of this agreement as provided by state and local laws.
Makes it sound pretty easy.
Well, to a non-attorney,
Yeah.
it makes it sound like I can change anything I want, whenever I want, no matter what I want.
However I want.
However, and is that the case? Because if that's the case in the way I understand it, why do we even have a lease?
Well, you got that little tiny clause at the end, as provided by state or local law.
Oh,
That's the
man.
one that gets you.
Okay.
So we got to be careful. Now, in a lot of states, there are no laws on this. They're territorial. For instance, Idaho, there are laws and everything, but there's no Landlord-Tenant Act.
Okay.
So where there's a Landlord and Tenant Act, there generally is something to do with this area that you have to be familiar with.
Okay.
And every state's a little different. And there are some states that have nothing. So, you just do what you want.
Okay.
But you have to start off, if you don't have that language in there, you're done. You're cooked. You can't change anything, period.
The lease is the lease.
That's
and
it.
you live to live in the
That's
four
it.
corners.
So, yeah, you have to have
Right.
something in there. If you see something, well, we all see something. It's the things we don't see.
Okay.
I sound like a politician doing a word salad. But what we don't see is what we need to change down the road, because if we had seen it, it would have been our lease.
Exactly.
And so we need a change. We need something different. For example, I'll give you an example. Just the other day, I got a call from a landlord, real nice guy. And he's got an interesting situation. He leases 2 bedrooms in his home.
Okay.
And he's got all kinds of problems because now there's people staying over late, all night.
Guests of the people.
Right. And so we got talking about that, and I said, what about your refrigerator? I mean, because you've got common area.
Right.
And you've got the rooms. Your common area is the rest of your house.
Right.
And if you don't say anything, they have free reign. So do they get a part of the refrigerator? When do they get to have the TV on? Do they get to be in the front room using your TV?
Right.
And you can take this and then extrapolate it to any dwelling.
Right.
If you don't have it in there, you're in trouble.
Right. Because there's
So-
no way we can foresee every little tiny thing that comes down the road.
Right. And it's those little tiny things that get you into court. So that's why you want to have everything you can possibly have in your lease, because you don't want to give a judge the free reign to say, well, this is how we're going to deal with it.
Right.
You want to have a judge go, okay, well, it says it right here.
Right. You knew about it.
That's how
you
it's going
signed
to work.
It. Right.
Well, I didn't read it.
Right.
Well, that's not going to work. That's
right.
not a defense.
Right.
So we probably need to think about, like, we've talked about this, and you mentioned, well, what about smoking?
Right.
Okay, so you don't have no smoking in your lease. And now
You walk in there and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot that. And it is not good.
right.
Can you change that?
I don't know, can you?
You're-
We got to look at the rules. So we go when we look at the rules. There are a couple of things. One is retaliation. Okay. For example, they're smoking, and they're addicted
Okay.
to smoking,
Okay.
and they've pissed you off somehow, and let's say they complain to a government agency about health and safety rules in your house.
Okay.
So you say, I'm going to get them back. I'm changing my rules. No smoking.
Okay.
You got a problem?
Yeah, because you knew they were smoking, you didn't do anything about it, and now another circumstance comes in, now you make that stance.
Right. Well, what if they didn't complain to a government entity about health and safety that the landlord didn't take care of, that they were supposed to take care of, and now you go, yeah, I see that this is an issue. I don't want this smoke in my house. I don't want to have to go back in and paint the walls, especially if you rented it furnished. That stuff's going to be in my fabric.
I've been there. I know.
In
Absolutely.
the carpet.
Yes.
So can you do it now?
I would think that, yes, I could do it now if I took care of it the first time I knew it was going on. But if I let it go, I think I would waive my right to, because then it could be seen as retaliatory.
Right. Fortunately, we have something in the lease that says even if I allow it to go on, I don't waive any rights if I don't take care of it right now.
See,
so we're good on that.
See, look at there, 47 pages. I should read that.
So we look at this issue and we go, okay, well, in the state that has some rules, we look at those rules and say, okay, if we want to change that smoking, because that's a huge thing for that tenant.
That is big.
That's like, well, I wouldn't have rented here if I'd known I couldn't smoke here.
Right.
And now you're going to make me, I'm going to have to move because I'm not going to stop smoking, right?
Right.
And that's a pretty compelling argument for a judge. They've changed a material aspect of the lease. That's what they would say. Is that a material aspect? It may be. You know, a judge is not going to let you change a material aspect of the lease no matter what's in your lease.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to go to other areas, and most landlord-tenant acts have something in there. For example, I'll give you one. You have to look at why and when can a landlord adopt different rules.
Okay.
So you go to and say, is the purpose to promote the convenience and safety or welfare of the tenant?
Not the landlord, the tenant.
The tenant.
Okay.
In the premises, or to preserve, and this is a good one, the landlord's property from abuse, or make a fair distribution of services and facilities held out to the tenant generally. Well, now we got a little bit of an argument here, a pretty good argument, to preserve the landlord's property from abuse.
Okay, so in my lease, I didn't have, you could not have a barbecue grill underneath the covered patio. And I noticed these guys start grilling quite a bit. And
Yes.
I noticed black on my ceiling, and I'm like, this is going to burn the place down.
And you didn't have it in your lease.
And I didn't have it in my lease. Would that qualify?
I think that would qualify. For instance, in our lease, it's 15 feet from the structure.
Right.
But I think that's one that's overlooked probably a lot. You see people putting their grill right up against the house.
Right.
And that
but
needs to be
materially,
moved
that
off.
could then create a health and safety, an issue.
It's health and safety, but more importantly, when you look at the whys, it does go to the safety and welfare of the tenant and the abuse of the landlord.
Okay.
So I think even if you don't have a statute, Landlord-Tenant Act, most judges are going to go to this and say, yeah, that's reasonable. This is reasonable.
Right.
And that's how we have to deal with it when we work with our tenants, even if we want to change the rules. Typically, we want to change the rules because we have a really, really good reason. Hey, we got to fix this. This is not working right. And someone's going to get hurt. Or it could be either one, tenant or landlord. Another reason is it has to be reasonably related to the purpose for which it's adopted. Okay. So, for instance, let's say you want to stop the smoking, and I can't think of a matter right here, but let's say it, they really don't even smoke. Well, is it reasonably related if we don't even smoke? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe not. And of course, the argument would be, well, if it doesn't matter,
Then
why does it matter to you?
Why change the rules, right?
It has to apply to all the tenants.
Okay.
So if you have a multifamily, it's got to apply to everybody equally.
Okay, what about 2 individual single-family homes? You can have rules different on each of those.
You can have rules different on each
Okay.
home. And of course, these landlords would have these homes in separate entities. Hopefully, so they're completely separate.
Okay, Denny, what about in a situation where I do a handshake deal? I don't really have a lease. I'm a brand new landlord. You give me some money. You move in. We settle on $1,100 a month, and we have no agreement whatsoever. And now I realize you're smoking. You have a dog. You run a car wash business out at the front of my house, and you have the hose on all day, and I pay for the water. I mean, what about a situation where you don't have a lease, and there's no rules that are established at all?
Terrible situation to start with. But how long's the lease? How long's your agreement?
I don't know. I don't have one.
I mean, you've got a verbal agreement going on here of some kind because he's paying rent.
For the month.
Okay.
Month to month, I imagine.
Okay. So the easy way to take care of that is forget about changing the rules. Here's your 30-day notice. So long.
Okay.
I don't want to put up with this anymore.
Because it would not be worth fighting anything like that.
No, it'll take you longer if you were fighting over the rules than to simply say goodbye. That's how I would handle that. So, but again, and as a landlord, everything has to be in writing. Just everything. You can't have anything verbally. It will get you in trouble every time.
I think you get in trouble when you don't have a lease. I think you get in trouble when you buy the store-bought, Staples lease. You really need to have, this is the business agreement. This is the structure of the whole partnership right here. You need to spend some time and know your lease completely. Now, you can change some rules that we went over today if everybody benefits and there is a reason for it that is, I want to say important. I guess it'd be important to all of us. But if
it's
there's
important for the health and safety and welfare of everybody,
right,
and so it doesn't abuse, the landlord's property.
Okay, so pets, could you change that? Give up one of your household members, your pets?
Well, we're getting into a material issue because to some people, pets are their children.
Okay,
and they're pretty important. So could you go in and say, okay, no pets? I would first look to see how long's my lease.
Okay.
Then I would look to see, is there any other way I can deal with this?
Okay.
And if there's not, then if I really wanted this to happen, I would go ahead and say, hey, look, I'd talk to the tenant and say, this is not going to work because you've got to be able to then mend it together and say, look, this is a problem with the abuse of my property. I don't want to have, a dog chewing up my carpet. Had I known, I would have said no, because you didn't tell me anything about a dog.
Right.
And so, I go back to the abuse of the landlord's property, and I try to do it that way. But I would definitely move on it because I don't want my property destroyed.
Okay, we've already talked about smoking.
Yep.
Okay. You should have a clause there about unauthorized occupants, so that shouldn't be an issue or a rule change, right? But if you don't,
right,
and someone else moves in,
you got a problem.
Is that something?
Now, like in any kind of property, if somebody else moves in and there's nothing about it,
yeah,
you got a problem. So do you need to change it? Yeah, you need to try to change it.
Okay. So this probably, after talking to you, is more like when I have I have a short-term rental and the city comes in and says no more short-term rentals allowed. And if I had them sign a lease for a certain date coming up, I could say, hey, guys, sorry, I need to change the rules on this because the state has changed the rules on this, and I'm not allowed to have you in the property.
Yeah, and you need that in your lease as well, that if any governmental agency changes anything, that I can immediately invoke a rule to make compliance with the state or the governmental agency.
So in addition to this paragraph right here, you would need an additional paragraph to cover yourself on if a government made a change that affected you.
Right, and our lease has that.
Okay, but this will not cover it by itself.
By itself, that paragraph will not cover it. It's kind of for a little bit different purpose.
Okay.
But if you're using a rent perfect type lease,
Okay.
it's in there. You should be protected, and especially when it comes to taxes, like governments levy taxes on the property, and that is in our lease.
Right.
If the government levies or anything else happens with government, we get to pass that on.
Right. We see certain inspections that have to be done at a certain amount of times from the government agencies on homes that are a little bit older and need inspected. I mean, we see all kinds of things changing. So what's interesting, Denny, is we're talking about one clause in a lease that, people ask us why it's such a long lease, and yet in this one discussion about this one paragraph, we've talked about 3 or 4 or 5 other paragraphs that you need to protect yourself.
Yep.
That right there is why the lease is multiple pages, because one paragraph does not take care of everything. So what I get out of this podcast is how important this lease is, right? And that we understand each individual, paragraph, but know that we're covered in its entirety. And so don't be afraid. Do not be afraid to incorporate our lease into your properties. The majority of people never print it out. They sign it online. But, man, there's some stuff in here that you might not understand, like we started this podcast with. And these are here to protect you. Denny, thank you so much for going through some of this lease language with us. We appreciate all you do for us. And until next time, continue to rent perfect.